Folks, if you're just joining us, we have an extremely special guest for you this afternoon. His name is the Right Honourable Peter.
Just Honourable.
The Honourable Peter Miliken. He is the Canadian Speaker of the House, and we are going to be speaking with him this afternoon about all things Canadian and all things parliamentary. Sir, I want to welcome you to the show first off. Thank you for joining us and taking the time out from the schedule, because I know it is crazy right now for you. First elected in 1988, you beat out Flora MacDonald. That was a bit of an unexpected election, I bet, for you.
Yes, that's fair to say.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Let our folks know a little bit about the history.
Well, it was just an interesting campaign. I ended up winning the nomination some months before the election was called, and so spent a good part of the summer knocking on doors in my community in Kingston there, and it paid off. And when the election came along and I was doing more of the door knocking, I think people indicated their willingness to shift, and I wasn't totally shocked on election night given the reception at the doors, which had been so positive. In the course of the campaign. Of course, I didn't win by a huge margin, but Flora had been the member for 16 years and quite a capable MP and a minister of various things, foreign affairs, and so on. And she, I think, was a little surprised too. But
well, sir, I think that speaks volumes to your passion for the country. And that's where I'd like to go now, is talk about why politics, sir? Why did you gravitate towards politics in service to Canada? Well,
I got interested in it when I was a high school student. I started working in election campaigns back then and enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting. You got to meet all kinds of people at the door when you were knocking on doors, which is what I liked to do most, really. And then you'd get to work with other people in the campaign that were working for the same cause, which I found very interesting. And you met people in the other campaigns that was often fun too. You know, you'd sit and have a chat about how different things were going and the strengths of various candidates and so on. So I always found it something that interested me, and I think I've worked in every campaign since 1963.
Wow.
Every federal campaign.
Folks, our guest this afternoon, the Honourable Peter Miliken. He is the Speaker of the House in Canada, for those of you that are listening across the world, and indeed in the United States as well, and that's part of the world. We're talking about all things Canadian and all things parliamentary this afternoon. First elected in 1988, of course, and the longest sitting Speaker of the House. That's quite an honour, sir.
Yes, I'm very honoured by my colleagues.
Can we explain to the folks that are unaware the role that you play, the essential role you play in Parliament and the fundamental democracy that this country has?
Well, the Speaker presides over the sittings of the House. I have 3 deputy speakers that work with me in that respect. So we share the time out. Technically, the Speaker chooses who speaks next, and I say technically because the parties provide lists of who they want in which order, and you generally follow that list so people aren't taken by surprise and shock at getting called suddenly. The Speaker tries to maintain order in the House while a member has the floor so he or she can be heard. The Speaker decides points of order or questions of privilege, that is procedural arguments that are advanced by members challenging what someone else is doing or has done, or where the House is going if they think it's the incorrect move from a procedural perspective. And the Speaker makes decisions that are final and binding in respect of those matters in the House. So it's basically a sort of kind of judge, in a way, of certain parts of the proceedings. Certainly it's almost a quasi-judicial role in respect of those items. And then as the presiding officer, the members are supposed to address their remarks to the chair and not to each other.
How does the Speaker of the House get chosen?
The Speaker is elected by the members on a secret ballot on the first sitting day of the House following a general election, or if a vacancy occurs in the position. All members are eligible to run except party leaders and cabinet ministers. So the members can sign out if they wish and not participate in it as as candidates if they would like to do that, but otherwise their name will be on the ballot. The candidates for the speakership get to make remarks at the opening of the House for 5 minutes maximum, and then the voting takes place. All the members are eligible to vote, and the winner has to get 50% plus one of the votes cast in order to be elected. And so if somebody doesn't get that many votes, you have another ballot, and you keep having ballots until somebody gets it, and the lowest person goes off on the ballot. So you keep cutting the numbers down as the voting goes on. It might take several ballots, and it has on several occasions for me.
Now, traditionally, the Speaker of the House comes from the party that's in the majority. Such is not the case with yourself, sir.
Not at the moment. It's fair to say, though, the Speaker was not elected this way until 1986.
Oh, thank you.
Before that, the Prime Minister would move that one of the members be the Speaker, and the motion was usually carried, and of course it was usually one of the members from his or her own party. In 1986, they started the election process, and yes, in 1986, the person who won was a member of the governing party, and re-elected in '88, same person, same party in office. And then when the Liberals came into power in 1993, a new Speaker was elected, and that person was from the governing party also. And I was from that party when I was first elected in 2001, and then it's been minority parliaments ever since, and I've been re-elected for the 3 times in the minority parliaments.
Sir, you've resided over some very profound decisions, without question, and I won't go into detail about them, but what I want to get across to the students that are listening right now is your thought process. When a decision has to be made in Parliament, how do you research that and come up with your response? What's your first initial process?
Well, it's the clerks who work for the House do virtually all the research. I rarely do any. They come to me and say, which way am I leaning on this? Which way do I think is the likely decision? And I'll tell them, and they'll go and research. If they come up with something that indicates that my decision appears to be incorrect and I should do it some other way, they'll come and tell me that. But that hasn't happened very often. So normally they come back with cases or precedents that back up what I've been doing, and they've done a draft ruling which I then revise and change, and if necessary, and then I deliver the ruling in the House later. So basically they do that work. It's not, I'd have trouble doing that kind of research, just getting the time to do it. So it's done for me by this group.
You talk about precedents and things. Where did the initial parliamentary rules come from? Were they brought over from Great Britain, and did we morph them into a Canadian version of those?
Yes, I would say so, definitely. I mean, our practice has certainly been very similar to the British practice, but there have been variations occur over time, and we have our own books of precedent and practice now. There is the British book, Erskine May, that is still cited from time to time, but we have now a Canadian work of similar magnitude, and it's cited much more frequently. You hardly ever hear somebody quote Erskine May in the House in an argument now. It's usually O'Brien and Bosque, which is the latest version of ours, and it came out, what, a year and a half ago, something like that.
Oh, that recent?
Yes, that's the second edition of the procedural manual. Marlowe and Montpetit was the first one, and O'Brien and Bosque is the second.
It's the second one. How often are the rules updated? Do you go back and say, okay, this one's a little bit outdated, maybe we should do this?
I usually don't. Occasionally I'll suggest something to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, but it's the committee that comes up with changes usually, or the government may go to the committee and ask them to recommend a bunch of changes, and the committee may do that. There haven't been any standing order changes recently that I'm aware of. I don't think there's been one for the last year at least, if not longer than that. I think it is longer than that. But in the minority parliament, it's tough to get agreement on how you're going to change the rules too.
You must be clairvoyant, sir. One of my next questions was, you've served with a majority parliament as well as a minority. What are the differences for you?
It's just there are more procedural games in a minority parliament. You know, members try to do things. It's like the issues that have been raised in the rulings in a majority parliament. Those probably would never have come up because the majority would have voted down the request for the information, or they would have negotiated a deal on exactly what was to be released with the other parties and then agreed to it. In a minority, and in fact, I think in both the cases that have dealt with production of documents that I have dealt with in rulings, the House passed the motion completely contrary to the government's wishes. It was an opposition day motion, I think, or a concurrence in a committee. I forgot which it was the first time. And the second was a committee motion that was passed and not complied with. But it was the committee that demanded production of these documents. And of course, the committee had a majority of opposition members on it, and they voted it through. As I say, in a majority parliament, that would not have been the case. And either they'd have negotiated something, or if the opposition had insisted on a particular wording of a motion which demanded everything, I'm sure the government members would have voted it down and it wouldn't have come to the House. So it's a different situation. As I say, the members use the rules to get at one another a bit and score their points. Because the rules may demand interpretation now and again, the Speaker gets drawn into it from time to time in making rulings.
There must be a fine line you walk as well as, you know, you want to enable the members, of course, to get their viewpoints and perspectives across. But when do you know to rein them in when they're kind of crossing the line and really getting personal in their attacks and that type of thing?
Well,
is that a judgmental call?
Yes, yes, very much so. Yeah, you just it depends on how personal the language is and how insulting. Yeah, because we do enjoy freedom of speech. You're supposed to be able to say pretty much what you want, but there are some restrictions that the House has imposed in terms of past practice in the use of offensive language and the use of language that causes offense because it's insulting and personal. And of course, you're supposed to stay relevant to the subject under discussion. So in question period, that's quite wide open, but in normal debate, you are supposed to stick with the subject matter of the bill before the House. And if you start going on about somebody's evil intent or malpractice, you may be getting a bit off topic.
Understood, sir. By the way, folks, we're speaking with the Honourable Peter Miliken. He is the Canadian Speaker of the House. And the next question I have for you, sir, is you must feel the pressure of the democracy, this great democracy of Canada, on your shoulders at times, because it is your guidance and judgment that makes Parliament work. How do you deal with that pressure, day in, day out?
I don't find there is that much pressure. I don't find it a very difficult job. It's not difficult. It's time-consuming, but it's not difficult. And you know, the advantage is you get to interact with the members really whenever you want to. I can call a member over to the chair and have a word with him or her, no problem. They're not going to ignore me for that. They'll always come from whichever party. So you have certain advantages in the position in dealing with other members that you can use that way and talk to them and urge them to do something differently or refrain from doing something they might be thinking of.
Has there been prime ministers in the past that you've resided over that have impressed you in terms of their political savvy and how to use Parliament?
Well, I think they all have that to some considerable extent. I mean, and they've got different ways of doing it. Different prime ministers have done things in different ways. But I think, no, I wouldn't express a view as to one was different from another, particularly in any way, anyway. I won't do that. But I've enjoyed working with all the prime ministers I've worked with in the House.
What were your surprises when you took on the role as Speaker? Were you what's the word I'm looking for, afraid to take on that role, or were you pushed into, did you volunteer for it?
Oh, very much so. I ran to be Speaker in 1993 because I thought I would enjoy the work. I was unsuccessful in that election. And then I became deputy speaker in one of the assistant deputy in 96, and then deputy in 97. So yes, I was quite keen on staying in the chair and moving up to the top of it, if you like. So it was, there was no, I wasn't pushed into it. I was quite keen to do it myself. Yeah.
What were some of the surprises you experienced?
I don't know that I was particularly surprised, because having been deputy speaker, I was quite accustomed to what would happen, how the thing worked, how the position worked, and how the House functioned, and what members would expect of the speaker. I don't think I found it really a surprise. To me, it was...
There's a great role that you play diplomatically that people are unaware of. Could you speak a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, I guess if there was a surprise, that was it, because I was really quite unfamiliar with that. I was unaware that the speaker spent so much time and got invited to so many things. There are about 120 ambassadors or high commissioners here in Ottawa, and when a new one is appointed and has presented his or her credentials, they come and pay a courtesy call. So I get to meet them here in the office. We have a cup of coffee together and a chat about relations between our countries. And then I get invited to their National Day, all of them.
Wow.
So there's a whole bunch of those. If they have a visiting minister, prime minister, or president, or some important political person from their country visiting Ottawa, they'll usually have a lunch or a dinner or a reception for that person. I get invited to a very large number of those. When one of them is leaving, one of the others will have a farewell dinner for him or her. I get invited to a whole bunch of those. And when a speaker comes to visit Parliament, I'll have a lunch or dinner for the speaker and a courtesy call. But then the ambassador will normally have something for the speaker as well, either another lunch or a dinner or a reception, and I'll get invited to that for sure. So there's a very large number of social type events that I have with the diplomatic corps that take up a lot of time. It's very interesting because they're nice people and you get to chat about their country and so on with them, but it does take a lot of time.
It's taxing. When do you get a chance to stick your feet up and just watch a movie, go out and rent a movie and maybe order a pizza?
That doesn't happen very often.
Now, I understand that you want to retire.
Yes.
Now, what kind of silliness is this?
Oh, it's common sense. No, then I can watch some of these movies, and of course I get given some. People come with gifts. You get a DVD about the country they've come from. It's tough to get time to look at those things, so maybe in retirement I'll get a chance to do that.
What are your plans post-Speaker of the House?
I haven't made any. I'll wait and see when it all comes down, because the Speaker remains a Speaker until the new House meets. So there will be some time before the end of the thing, and even if an election is called promptly. And we'll see how long that takes.
Got any funny stories for us?
Hadn't thought of that. I know.
Okay. What makes you angry? What gets you really miffed? Besides interviewers.
I don't know. I don't tend to get that angry that often. I don't think. I don't feel that I do anyway. I suppose listening to the same thing repeated in the House when you know it's junk, but you don't get that annoyed about it. You get used to that.
You get used to it. Now, I imagine a position like yours, sir, requires a great deal of patience. Were you brought up in a household where patience was a virtue?
I suppose. Certainly you got used to having a lot of people around. I'm the oldest of 7, so there were lots of others running around the house and keeping things running, is safe to say. Yeah.
Does it anger you when people don't respect Parliament?
I don't know that I get angry, but I think it's an important part of the functioning of the country that Parliament be respected, and that involves the members, but also people writing about it or speaking about it. Yeah, I think Parliament does a job, and a very meaningful job for the country, and I think people forget about it, and they don't hear a lot about the details on things like legislative work. There's virtually no coverage of debates in the House on bills. Very little coverage of what's going on in committee on bills. Yes, on scandals, sure, but not on the details of changes to bills and all that sort of thing. And the work that Parliament does in that regard, I think, is very important.
Maybe that's something that could change in the future. It seems that mainstream media just approaches the sexy stuff, as I call it.
Exactly.
The little 2-minute soundbite or minute soundbite, and it's almost like, I was going to say Peyton Place, it's almost like a soap opera. Geez, I just dated myself very badly. Sir, when you retire, do you think you'll be putting a book out?
I don't know, I haven't thought that far ahead. It could happen.
That would be nice.
No.
Going back to Kingston?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
By the way, folks, he's a Kingston native, and that's where we are broadcasting out of now. We are speaking with the Honourable Peter Miliken today. He is the Speaker of the House in Canada, and we're talking about parliamentary procedures, we're talking about decision-making, and all things Canadian. Sir, you've gone from coast to coast to coast. Favorite part of Canada?
Oh, Kingston.
Oh, good answer.
But, oh no, it's great traveling around our country. There's so much to see and so many nice places to visit. It's just great. Excuse me,
problem, sir. No problem. Do you want a glass of water or something?
I'm fine.
Okay. It's funny, we were just watching TV as I was waiting for you to come back to proceed with this interview, and of course Libya is all over the news. And I was remarking that it's so nice to live in Canada. We have this beautiful, beautiful democracy, this little cherished diamond, as I say. And what are the aspects of democracy, of the Canadian democracy, that always have you admiring it?
Well, I think the federal system is great. Given the size and diversity of our country, it gives an opportunity for at least regions, if you want, to work together and do things that are important in those regions and that may be slightly different from others. I think that diversity is great for our country, and I think it's a real pillar of our democracy. And then the parliamentary systems that operate throughout the country at the provincial and the national level are also quite important. And
sir, in your opinion, what are the advantages of a parliamentary system, say, over the American system?
Well, you don't have this great division of powers between the President and the Congress, which can get into conflict, as we're seeing at the moment in the United States. I think it makes the place very difficult to govern. Yes, in a minority parliament, ours can be a little challenging too, but the parties can still work things out and get stuff passed. Government may not want to go as far as it would if it had a majority, because it may not want to risk putting itself down in the polls given the minority situation in the House. But set that aside, the place can still function. The division of powers in the states is so drastic that, Congress passes a bill the President doesn't like, he vetoes the bill, so nothing gets done. We generally don't have that happen. Usually the bill gets amended and the parties will settle on something that will work and will make some change in the law that can function. And in that sense, I think we're a little ahead, a little more functional. Yes, it can break down, but I think it's less likely to than the American one, which is so relatively hard-nosed in terms of the divisions. And it creates real difficulties. And of course, you've elected a president on a national vote who has a lot of authority because of that vote, where our Prime Minister gets his authority from his members in the House of Commons. So they have something to say, usually, about what's going on in the government. And if they don't like what's happening, they can end it if need be. So there's considerable power in members of Parliament that we don't hear about a lot. No, they don't always flex their muscles and use it, but it is there.
That's a very good point,
Yeah, it is. It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the areas that you would like to see change? Are you able to speak about that? Like, I'm thinking of the Senate, perhaps.
No, I wouldn't want to express views on that. I think the Senate You know, I'll say one thing very positive about the Senate, and that is it does not get coverage for the work that it does. I think the Senate does excellent work in amending legislation in this place. If I can use an example, a minister will introduce a bill in the House in response to some national problem that everybody's complaining about. The Commons will pass the bill, unanimous consent with no debate. Bang, go through, send it to the Senate. Because they've got to be seen to be acting on this, and everybody wants to be show that they're fully supportive of a government initiative to clean up the mess that was created and that this bill's going to fix. And then the Senate, because they're unelected, will sit back and look at the bill, and they'll make corrections and changes to it that make it a lot better. And they get no credit for this.
And you feel that's because they're unelected?
Yeah, absolutely. If they were elected, they'd be under pressure to show that they were supporting this. They've got to get it passed right away, but they're not. And so they say, no, we're going to send this to the committee and study it. And they get experts in, and it turns out there's some bad wording in the bill that should be fixed, and they fix it. And this never gets reported. They send the amended bill back to the House, we pass it immediately, and it gets royal assent. But they have done something very constructive and very useful in respect of that legislation, and it happens regularly. And not just on bills like that, but on other ones that have got through where we missed something, and they take a little time and look at it. And yes, sometimes the opposition parties and sometimes the government will complain the Senate's holding things up. But often their work is in fact very useful and very good, and they get absolutely no credit for the work they do on these bills, because a lot of the amendments they adopt are ones that are easily accepted in the House, like no argument about it. They say, yeah, that's better. Bang, pass it. No debate. But you never hear about it.
You know, that's a very interesting perspective on the Senate, one that I was not aware of. You just educated me on a whole completely different perspective. Thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Isn't that interesting?
It's an important body in the legislative process, in my view. Yes, you could argue that it's expensive, and for what it does, maybe we don't need to spend that kind of money. But I'm not getting into that debate. I just think it's downplayed in ways that are inappropriate when you look at what it in fact does in terms of amending stuff and fixing things up and doing studies on subjects too that the House won't want to touch. It's a little sensitive. Elected members don't want to really question this or that, so they stay away from it. Senate will do it.
Fair enough. Peter Miliken, the Honourable Peter Miliken, is our guest this afternoon, folks, Canadian Speaker of the House. Final question for you, because I don't want to monopolize your time. Imagine yourself, sir, at a podium right now speaking to every university student across Canada from coast to coast to coast. What would you say to them?
Study hard. Get active in politics in one way or another, whether it's voting, whether it's working in campaigns, or supporting candidates, whatever you do. I think learning about the political process and how it works, how it affects our lives is important, and university graduates are going to be leaders in their community over a period of time in different communities across our country, and knowledge of what's going on in politics, I think, is a very useful thing for them to be able to transmit to others and share with others in their work. So I say get active.
Right on. I think that's a perfect way to end it. I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, but I also want to reiterate what I said before. I respect the fact that you want to retire. I hope you rethink that, because I think your service to the country has been extremely, extremely exceptional. And I want to thank you for that over all the years. You've made some tough decisions and guided this wonderful country of ours through those times. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be interviewed in your program.
I'm Brent Holland. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. By the way, folks, www.brenthollandshow.com. All the interviews of all the guests are there, free for you to download. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.